Have I told any stories in here? I mean, you can't fly an airplane from Mexico into the United States without people noticing, and wound up with 7 years in federal prison. And the moral of the story is, if you're gonna be a stripper, you should, make up a fake name. The other moral of the story is, if you're gonna be a stripper, you should not use your sister's name. We don't have a lot to do today. Chapter 7 is much shorter than the other ones. So we're going to start with a review and then cover Chapter 7, and which is on ontological daddy issues. It used to just be called ontology, but ontological daddy issues is a much more fun title, I think. And then this is going to mark the end of the first half of the course, right? So a big shift after today. So 70% or so of your exam questions will come from these 7 chapters. And the remaining 30% will be about the second half of the course, but the better you understand the tools and things from the first half, the better you'll be able to handle those questions, right? Basically the idea is the first half is giving you philosophical tools, teaching you vocabulary and concepts and ideas and everything in these 7 chapters. And then the second half is applying those, right? Applying them to texts, seeing how they work in Plato's texts and in the Katha Upanishad and that sort of thing. And in whatever show or movie we pick. Have we picked something? We haven't picked anything yet. Any ideas? What did we come up with the other day? Do you know what we're talking about?
No.
All right.
I know we talked about Rick and Morty.
I mean, Rick and Morty's a solid choice always. We could pick an episode or two. I mean, I could. Okay. Abby's not a fan. That's okay. Rick and Morty's on a 6-week hiatus, by the way. Okay. We have some other ideas?
No.
Okay.
I mean, I know last time we talked about Get Out.
Get Out. I really liked Get Out. I think that's a solid option too. All right, let's catch Vaughn up, and then let's pick something. Okay, so let's do some review so that we all fully understand why we're trying to pick a show. What class am I in? All right, so we've got systematic philosophy, right? Chapter 1, ontology is at the center. And then what's on the next rung? And the next rung? You'll want to learn all this. Next rung? Good, and those are called what? Those 3. Close.
The first principles of philosophy?
Yeah, that's it. These are the first principles of philosophy. Then on the outside, yeah. Yeah. And what's the point of all this and how they're arranged? Yeah.
The more inner you're in the circle, the more that's your reality.
Yeah, you're on the right track.
Inner is most permanent, the outer is least permanent.
Yep. Yep. So your emotions change. Your emotions can change moment to moment, second to second, right? And states of mind can change based on various substances or how you're feeling or whatever, right? Your understanding of ontology doesn't change very much. Your understanding of epistemology changes as you learn things, but as you get older, then those things become more calcified and rigidified. You get increasingly, deeply embedded patterns of thought, neural pathways in your neural network, right? Become calcified. So, yeah, all of these things, right? So then, your desires are more changing. These, I don't know, they should probably be further in. But your understanding of who you are as a person, your understanding of the world around you, and your understanding of your ethical, moral responsibilities in the world, right? Your meaning and purpose. Why are you here? All these kind of things. You can't answer any of these questions without answering all three, right? Who am I? Where am I? And why am I here? You can't answer any of those questions without answering all three, right? And so definitely no divisions between those, but they're also not the same questions. So we call those the first principles of philosophy. So let's see, that's chapter 1, systematic philosophy. And in that chapter, we also talked about the allegory of the chariot, right? What's the allegory of the chariot?
One horse is logic, one horse is desire, but I forget what the intellect.
Yep, intellect. And the intellect is what? The part of the human person that does what? Makes decisions. Right? So the intellect is the charioteer. And then horse and horse. Right? This horse is way stronger than this other horse. This horse is super obedient, right? So a horse that's super obedient does everything you tell it to do, and then a horse that's way strong that does what it wants to do, because that's what desire is, right? And then the charioteer, the intellect, trying to make, decisions while controlling these two horses. Cool. Chapter 2 was on epistemology, right? So epistemology. So we did a little bit of logic and desire in chapter 1, but then chapter 2 is really on epistemology. And what is epistemology? How do we know what we know? What anchors our knowledge? Right? How do we know what we know? How do we know what we know? How do we know that what we know isn't bullshit? How do we know that our parents aren't lying to us the same way they lied to us about Santa Claus? Still upset about that one. And how do we know that they're right about what they think or what they believe, or our teachers or whatever? How do we know what we know? Right? Sometimes we get older and we find out things that we knew when we were younger just aren't true. So how do we know what we know? What anchors our knowledge? How can we be firm or confident or sure in our knowledge, right? So we started talking about anchors at that point. And then chapter 3. What's chapter 3? Phenomenology. I'll put this over here. So we're doing a phenomenology of being in this chapter. So what are the steps of phenomenology? Yeah.
Draw a circle.
Draw a circle. That's step 0. Where? This one? Yeah.
And then vaguely identify the thing.
Good. And why vaguely? Anyone? Well, the thing itself is not internal.
I thought it was about that because I remember you drew the picture about like the guy being like, "Oh yeah, I have this thought. How do I say it to you so you understand it?"
Yeah, okay, good. So that's step 2. Step 2 is to describe the phenomenon. All right, so what is and your perspectival starting point. Right, but let's distinguish between the phenomenon and the thing itself. So the phenomenon is right. Put that at the center. That's and then the the thing itself we put at the center, and the phenomenon, yep, is up here, right? So the phenomenon is up here. So you're trying to see this thing, whatever it is, that we're saying, hey, let's talk about X, but then the phenomenon is in your head, right? And so you want to clearly, carefully, I should say clearly, logically describe the phenomenon. But why vaguely identify the thing itself? Yeah.
Because you haven't processed it entirely in your mind to create the phenomenon.
True. Good answer.
I would say maybe because if somebody else, the same thing itself might be a different type of phenomenon, however that works.
So you're recognizing off the bat that somebody else knows something about this that you don't know.
Has a different perspective, right?
Exactly right, right? So you don't want to pretend like you know what this thing is, right? Because Connor is going to have a different, right? Because you acknowledge that you come from a different background or whatever, you're going to see things from a different place, right? You have different. We also in epistemology we talked about comparative relation. Right, so it's about how those neural pathways get formed as we're learning from childhood to adulthood. So those patterns get ingrained, right, based on parents and teachers and culture and society and media and all these kind of things, right? So you want to recognize that other people have differing perspectives on the thing itself. And what you really want to know, right, phenomenology is a mode of investigation. You're trying to learn something, right, trying to find something out that you don't know. So the first thing is you have to recognize, okay, well, I don't really know as much there is to know about this thing, right? I want to learn more about this thing, whatever it is, right? So here's what I know about this thing, and here's where I'm coming from. Here's my understanding of this thing. But then, right, so that's step 2, describe what you see as clearly and carefully and as logically as you can, being careful to define your terms and all this kind of stuff so that other people can understand you. But then step 3 is what? Parker?
Listen to experts and neighbors.
Facts. Yeah. So yeah, that's what you do in class, right? Is listen to experts. But then in your podcast, listen to your neighbors, right? So have these meaningful discussions with each other about how you're understanding these things. There's a philosopher I've mentioned a time or two, but haven't given you this before. But he said, so his name is Nicholas of Cusa, yeah. And he said, knowledge is to truth as a polygon is to a circle. So In the same way that, right, so in this example, the circle represents truth, and each point on the circle is a bit of knowledge, right? But the circle has an infinite number of points, and so each point on the circle is a little bit of truth, right? So Zach has a little bit of the truth, and Abby has a little bit of the truth, and Lonnie has a little bit of the truth, and the more points we have on the circle, the closer we get to understanding the truth, but we wouldn't have the truth unless we had all the points on the circle, but there's an infinite number of points on the circle, so we can't, right? And one new perspective has the possibility of changing how we think about everything, right? Maybe there's a perspective from out here that like totally changes everything. So knowledge is to truth as a polygon is to a circle. The closer you get, right, you can think about this gap here as margin of error, right? So like here's all these perspectives of truth that we're missing, and if we had more voices in the discourse, then we'd get closer and closer to the truth, right? But never get there, right? Or if we stay in our little internet boxes where we're only listening to people in our group, right? Then we're only getting a narrow swath of the truth, right? Doesn't mean that it's untrue, it just means that it's narrow, right? Cool. Chapter 3 reviewed. Chapter 4. So chapter 4 called Setting Course. Intercourse, discourse, and death, right? We talked about Mac Miller and all that kind of stuff, and main point then was what about death? Philosophy only begins with a meaningful reflection on the reality of death, not a hypothetical discourse about the possibility of an afterlife, but the meaningful discourse about the reality of death, right? Those are two very different things. Talking about death helps us to understand the finitude of life, right? And that we're going to die, and then helps us either become depressed like the Buddha did, right? Or grasp some existential purpose like the Buddha did, right? And intercourse is a way to pass on genetic material, genetic information from one generation to the next so that your part of your genetic code can outlive your body. Discourse, likewise, is a way to pass ideas, right? Ideas that get planted in somebody else's head, and those ideas can endure and survive long after, like Gandhi's ideas, or Martin Luther King's ideas, or Socrates' ideas, or Plato's ideas, right? And those come through discourse. So, the idea that's in Abby's head when she shares it with Vaughn or Zach, right? Then that idea gets planted in Vaughn's head, but it's going to be different now than it was in Abby's, right? Because Abby, even though it's the same idea or the same words, because Abby's different than Vaughn, then the same idea, the same words, when they get planted, they become something a little bit different, right? It's not quite what was in Abby's head, but it's something new to Vaughn, right? Something new. Right? So that's why both of these, intercourse and discourse, not always. Yeah, I got this, I'm scared to check Instagram. Stopped going on Instagram like a year and a half ago. This chick came over and we had a really fun afternoon, but weren't quite as safe as we should have been. And anyway, I'm just scared to check. Intercourse and discourse both lead to conception, is the point. right? So not all intercourse leads to conception. Some intercourse leads to conception, hence my fears about IG. Some discourse leads to conception. Some discourse is just drivel, right? Just waste of time. Cool? Make sense? Probably more things in that chapter, but that's a pretty good takeaway.
The chapter with the meta-narrative.
That's the next one. Chapter 5. Chapter 5 is the meta-narrative. Chapter 5 is on the... What did I call it? I called it something different. Oh, there you go. Yeah, I like that. That's really good. Anchors away. It's I like that a lot. First principles of philosophy. Right? And the whole point actually is anchors away, right? That's all these philosophers before, right? Like Descartes was looking for something to anchor, right? All philosophers are looking for something to anchor their knowledge. How do we know what we know? What is our knowledge? What anchors our knowledge, right? So that we can be certain of what we know. Descartes was pretty open about the fact that his parents, he learned a lot of stuff when he was a kid that turned out to be not true. And then when he became an adult, he was like, what the fuck? Like, what's true and what's not? What's fact and what's not, right? Everybody lies. What's true and what's not true? So he wanted to know. He's looking for something firm, something indubitable, something beyond all doubt, right? Something that he could be certain about. And what was his indubitable conclusion?
The fact that he could doubt makes him
Yeah, I can doubt everything except what?
doubting.
Yeah, that I am doubting. And then from that, he said, therefore, well, he said in Latin, cogito ergo sum, or as Billie Eilish says, I think, therefore I am, right? And then this is his anchor. So he's anchoring all knowledge right here in anthropology. So because I am a knower, I may not know what I know. My knowledge may not be firm, but I know that I'm a knower. Therefore, my knowledge is firm. Doesn't work though, does it? It doesn't seem to work. It doesn't seem to work. And then so David Hume came along and he was like, dude, it doesn't work, right? It's just wrong, right? It just doesn't work. Why doesn't it work? Yeah.
There is no I.
There is no I, yeah. So he's saying, right? Descartes is saying, I think, therefore I am, right? And Hume is saying, so what does he mean by there is no I? Yeah.
What we call I is just a stream of consciousness.
What we call I is just a stream of consciousness, yep. So there's just this, it's constantly changing, right? So you have, you can't have, to be a knower, right? To be a knower means that you have to know something. And what that something is, we call knowledge. Every time your knowledge changes, so too does the knower, right? So to be a knower is to know something, but that something is constantly changing. So, right? So to be a knower is to be in a state of constant change, like the stream of consciousness, right? And so there is no enduring I. I could have an accident and get amnesia and forget everything and be a totally different person, right? Or I could I could say, fuck this job and hop in my car and drive to Mexico and change my name to Rick Sanchez and like, I don't know, just totally do everything different. When my son graduates from high school, he's in 6th grade now. Yeah, when he graduates high school, my plan at least is to sell the farm, buy a boat, and sail. Just live on a boat, like, WWJBD. What would Jimmy Buffett do? Just like, buy massive amounts of rum and weed and just, I don't know, travel the world and be adrift. No anchor. Anchor's away, right? So that was the whole point. Descartes was trying to find an anchor. He put the anchor here. Hume said, bullshit, doesn't work, right? There is no anchor. There is no I. At least that's not it, right? And then Kant came around, and what did Kant say?
That, well, since he believes that society must have the same ethics, he stipulated Descartes' analysis, but he said, like, he gave props to Hume's, but he says Descartes is right because of race.
Yes, right, yeah. Very well said. So let's just unpack that a little bit. That was all right. So he said, we need an anchor. I'm just going to write it up here. We need an anchor. Why do we need an anchor? And first of all, what is we, right? We means society, right? We can't have laws and rules and civil society without ethics and morals and laws, right? In order to have laws, we need justification for those laws, and the justification needs to be sound and firm, grounded in what's right and wrong, which needs to be anchored in something, right? Needs some sort of anchor in order to anchor morality, and like things like slavery, right? And so you need something to say, all right, slavery is great and cool and all those kind of things, right? And so Descartes' theory works really well because you're born a slave, you're born, broken or whatever, you're born a heathen, you're born a savage, and you can't change that, right? So therefore, slavery, A-okay. Right? And Hume's like, no, we're products of our environment, right? We change all the time. No, everybody can change. You're not born any particular way. We're just animals, and we're like this stream of consciousness, and we can all learn, we can all change, we can all be different people. There's no sort of enduring, unchanging I. And Kant's like, yeah, okay, whatever, but slavery, right? And so we need an anchor, and let's go with Descartes. But we need an anchor, right, for all those reasons, morality and ethics and those kind of things. And he also said, importantly, acknowledging Hume, right, and basically, not basically, but absolutely saying, I'm not sure if I made this point well the other day or at all. The first principles. So this is Kant, said the first principles are, by definition, unknowable. Which is why you have to stipulate, right? Therefore, stipulate. All right, so we need an anchor in order to have a civil society. Yeah, Patrick.
Can you talk about the same first principles that we established?
Yeah, so what does it mean to be a human person? What is this world, and how do we know what it is? And what's the meaning and purpose of life? Yep, so those first principles, Descartes, I didn't mention this, but Descartes' famous text where he says, I think, therefore I am, it's called Meditations on First Philosophy. And the first meditation is on this, where he comes up with I think, therefore I am. Then the second one is on God. having proven this, then he proves the existence of God, because we don't need to get into that. And then he proves so he starts with this one and then proves the other ones, right? Cool, good. So we need an anchor. The first principles are by definition unknowable. Therefore, we have to stipulate them. Why are they unknowable? It's one of my favorite exam questions, partly because it's very hard. Don't expect everybody to be able to understand it or answer it.
The whole notion that essentially the world revolves around us.
Yeah,
And basically each human being in a way.
Yeah.
I have written that concept of philosophy is always changing and adapting new realization, which we kind of already said, but
Yeah.
kind of why we can't. Whatever you just asked.
Yeah. Okay, so here's the logic behind it. So he said, all right, if I don't remember teaching this in here. So he said, all right, so we're trying to find an anchor or a basis. Right? We're trying to find a basis or foundation for knowledge. Right? That's the whole point of epistemology. The word episteme, right? We talked about the etymology of that word. What does our knowledge stand on? Right? So he's trying to find some firm foundation or basis. I'm calling it an anchor, but they called it like some firm foundation or basis for knowledge, and right, so that we can be certain about what we know. But Kant just pointed out logically, right? So if you, the basis or foundation for knowledge, by definition, cannot be knowledge, right? If it's knowledge, then it's not the basis for knowledge, right? The basis for knowledge has to be something different than knowledge, right? So if the basis or foundation of knowledge were knowable, then it would be knowledge. And if it were knowledge, then we would need a foundation for it. And if that were knowledge, then we would need a foundation for it. And if that were known, we would need a foundation for it. On and on and on. In a problem called infinite regress. Infinite regress just means like the cause, and you never get to, a back. Here's another simpler way to understand it, right? So back to a river example. Let's imagine a mountain, right, with snow on the top, and a river coming down the mountain, right? So now the river. The point is that the source of the river is not the river, right? Because that's what it means to be the source. So the source of the river in this case is the snow. The snow is not the river. The snow is the snow. As soon as the snow melts, it becomes the river. It's no longer the source. It's the river now, right? That's what it means to be the source. So as soon as it becomes the river, then it's no longer the source. It's now the river. Make sense? Right? So the source of the river is not the river. The basis or foundation for knowledge is not knowledge. It cannot be knowledge. If it's knowledge, then it's not the basis for knowledge, right? So it, by definition, logically, cannot be known. Make sense? So, see why Kant was like, let's just pick one, right? I mean, he said all of that, what I just said, in like thousands of pages. So you're welcome. Thousands of pages of Kant. So we just need to stipulate, right? Because we need one, right? He keeps going back and forth between these two. Like They are unknowable. Here's all the reasons why we can't know them. And here's all the reasons why we really need them. We really have to have them, right? We can't proceed without them. And yeah, he did acknowledge that everything Hume said was perfectly reasonable, right? And basically said, look, we can go with this theory, right? Let's pretend for a moment that it was actually the Buddha who said it before David Hume, right? We talked about those restricted books and that kind of stuff, and that Hume read those books, and Kant did too, right? And Kant said, well, all right, we can go with that theory. We can build a whole philosophy. We can build a whole logical, philosophical system around the notion that there is no self, that the self is constantly changing in the same way that the world is constantly changing, and therefore our existential purpose would change based on context and based on the minute and that kind of stuff, right? But for Kant, that's way too relativistic. So, right, so that's another reason that he went with Descartes, but also slavery. Right, but we're going with a different. So then the second half of that chapter, we talked about a third option, right? So what's another option? So we can't put the anchor here, right? Because the world's constantly changing. What we know is constantly changing. We've already shown, or Hume has shown, and Buddha has shown, and we've shown, right, why you can't put the anchor there, hence the name anchors away, right? So we're erasing all these anchors. So you can't put the anchor there or there. What's another option?
A common set of text.
A common set of text, right. So let's find some sort of common set of texts, right? And then those can anchor our discourse, right? So then we can have, right, back to the, kind of erased it, right? So we can have a common set of texts, and those texts, whatever we choose, those can anchor our discourse. So we can argue against them, right? Patrick can argue one thing, Vaughn can argue the opposite thing, and Lonnie can argue something completely different, right? We can all argue different things, but the point is we have to tie ourselves to that anchor, right? We have to take those texts seriously. We have to take those texts. We can argue whatever direction we want, but we have to argue it in dialogue or in conversation or in relation to the text. Make sense? Right? And then that makes our discourse more productive, right? It leads to more conceptions. Cool. So that brings us, I think, pretty close to where we are now. So that's at least why we're choosing a show. So the question is, who gets to pick these texts, right? How do we decide what goes in there? How do we decide, what to choose? And I chose a bunch, right? I get to do that. So I chose some text by Plato. Damn it. A few of Plato's dialogues. First one that we'll read is the Republic. We're just reading a little section of it from Book 7. Book 6, or part of it I've already taught you, Book 6. 4 epistemologies, 4 ways of knowing. What are those 4 ways of knowing?
Rationality.
Yep.
Intellectual, rationalism, sensual, and imaginative.
Good. So then we're going to apply, so he teaches those in Book 6, Socrates teaches those in Book 6, and then in Book 7 he applies them. So we're going to do exactly the same thing. So we've learned them, then we'll apply them same way he does in that text. That'll be chapter 8, so that's coming up. This is called the Allegory of the Cave. How many of you are already familiar with the allegory of the cave? I thought so. Usually, some folks are kind of familiar with it. Then Symposium. So that's chapter 9. And Symposium is all about desire, the ladder of desire. Talk more about sex there, but also desire. And particularly erotic desire. Pretty much anytime I write the word desire, I mean eros. And then Phaedrus. And then we'll do that in chapter 10 and 11. And you'll have a podcast. So podcast 3 will cover these. And podcast 4 will cover just this, but building on those. Then we'll do the Kata Upanishad. That's chapters 12 and 13. And that'll be podcast 5. Maybe we'll try and squeeze chapter 14 in there. Chapter 14 is more like big picture, right? Sum up, conclusion. The conclusion. We'll do chapter 14 after. Right? And then so what we need though, so I picked all of these, but it shouldn't just be up to me. It should be way more democratic, right? So I really want y'all to pick something, and also something a little bit more recent than these things, so something that can anchor our discourse, something that we all watch, something that we all watch and talk about. Yeah.
I was thinking over the weekend we could, instead of doing like a movie/TV show,
Yeah.
we could do like music too.
Yep. We can definitely do music, like music videos or music. Yep.
Or
Absolutely.
just any music. I feel like if we could.
Yep.
Because you were talking about if we picked a TV show, we could go to specific episodes or whatever.
Yep.
But if we just did like music in general.
Yep.
We could find whatever, anybody could pick a song for whatever reason. It's got specific.
I'm so down, right? Yeah, and then we could do one, because then that's super short and focused, so we could do a different one for every class, right?
Yeah,
like,
that's kind of what I was thinking we could do.
Yeah, I'm so down with that for sure. We can do a combination of these too, right? We could do, we could think about it in units, and maybe one we just do songs, and one we do a show or a movie, and one we do a show or a movie. Fawn, did you have an idea? Was that no? Anybody know rapper named Royce the 5'9"? Do you know him?
Yeah,
I've
heard.
He's part of D12, which is D12 is Eminem's band. He's in Eminem's crew, but he has an album that dropped, I believe, in 2020, called The Allegory, which is an entire album devoted to Allegory of the Cave, which is kind of cool. Eminem's on that album. Yeah, we could pick something. You want to pick something for the next class? Zach, you have any ideas?
For a song?
Song, show, movie, song? Sure, let's go with song.
Okay. Mr. Rager.
What is that?
It's a song by Kid Cudi.
Mr. Rager?
Yeah, with the music video.
Kid Cudi?
Yeah.
Is that right?
CUDI.
Okay. Cool. We all want to pick something. I mean, we could. What? Yeah. I'm cool with that. I don't know that track. Yeah.
I was gonna say the reason I was thinking about the weekend too is because you put on "Self Care" by Mac Miller weeks ago.
Yeah.
I was just listening to. I heard like 3-4 other Mac Miller songs that get like pretty philosophical.
Facts.
So
Yeah.
I was thinking we could pick artist or we could pick like just I don't know, but I would be down to do something like just pick like an artist, like say Mac Miller or something like that, or maybe Kid Cudi or whatever.
Yeah. Okay, here's another option. Why don't we go with this? So we got 3 groups in here, right? Why don't we do and I think we have at least 3 classes in each of these sections. What if we have each group decides what we do for one class? Yeah? So you pick whatever. I mean, you could do Mr. Rager or Kid Cudi. We could do whatever. What do you think? And then you just tell us, hey, watch this ahead of time, or you could show it at the beginning of class. We can do it that way too. Cool? Solution? All right. Who wants to go first for the next class? You want to go with that? You want to go your group? Okay, cool. Word. All right. So Zach is 33, right? So the group 33, y'all can talk about it. You can keep that. You can change it, whatever you want. But I'm definitely going to check that out. Cool. All right. Wow. Wait. Yeah.
When you say TV show or movie, does it have to like be with philosophy or just
It's got to be something you can talk about, something worth talking about. But I find most things, you can find something to talk about. So it doesn't have to be what most folks doesn't have to use the word philosophy in it. Cool. I haven't even gotten to chapter 7, so we should do chapter 7 real fast. All right. Chapter 7 is pretty short though. So ontological daddy issues. So yeah, I'm just gonna stay over here. Okay, so this is one way of doing phenomenology, right? And it's the way that we're doing mostly in this course, following these steps and doing phenomenology exactly like we went through. Here's a very slightly different way of doing phenomenology. Start by drawing a circle and putting something in the center. So in chapter 6, which we didn't talk about in the review, but chapter 6 is on logic. And what's the first rule of logic? Clearly define terms, right? That's super, super important. Clearly define your terms. Now, one term that we use in English quite a lot is the word being, right? What does it mean to be? What does it mean for something to exist, right? We talked about Santa Claus and in what ways does Santa Claus exist, right? Santa can exist as an idea or as a rational entity, as a word, as a description, certainly as an image or character in a movie, right? But not as something that you can see or whatever, right? So there are various ways of being. But so when we're using, but that's part of the problem, right? So then when we're using the word being, we need to be clear so that when Connor talks about what's, describes the phenomenon in his head, he's going to use the word being or is or am, right? Or are, whatever form of being we talk about, right? But we use those words in lots of different ways, right? And so what we're going to do now is put this in the center, is or being, any of those words. in the center, and try to see some of the various ways that we use the term. 15 minutes. All right, first, super simple. I'm going to do this whole thing in 15 minutes. Identity. So rule of identity, super straightforward. You could say 2 plus 3 is 5, right? 2 plus 3 is identical to 5. 5 is 2 plus 3. You could also say 2 is 2, or 2 is 2. Why can you say all of these things? Because the word is, right? So just don't lose track of what we're doing. We're trying to look at the various ways. We're doing a phenomenology of being, meaning putting being at the center of the circle, right? It's the thing itself. And we're trying to clearly, carefully describe the various ways that we use that word, right? So one of the ways is identity, and it's pretty straightforward. The key thing, you know that it's identity because you can reverse the order, and it doesn't make any difference, right? Because both sides are completely equal. Both sides are identical to one another. Therefore, it doesn't matter. The syntax doesn't matter. Second one, quality. So the sort of stock philosophical example is the lotus is blue, right? Or you could say the marker is blue or whatever. It doesn't matter whether you're talking about a flower or a car or marker cap, whatever. You're saying that this thing that you're talking about has this quality of blue, right? Now notice one thing that you cannot say, right? You can say the lotus is blue because the lotus has the quality of being blue, but you cannot say blue is the lotus, right? It doesn't even make sense, right? Because blue is just more than this lotus or that lotus, right? The lotus could be blue, it could be red, it could be orange, it could be all sorts of possibilities of what it could be. But blue is a color, it's a quality. It can't just be limited to this thing or that thing. Make sense? Right? So you can't say this. That's part of how you know that we're using the term in terms of quality. Next, form. So form is a term that we've encountered a few times before and in a few different ways. One way was when we were talking about ontologies, right? Various ways of being. So we have those 4 ways of knowing: intellectual, rational, sensual, imaginative. They correspond to 4 ontologies or ways of being. And the first one that corresponds to intellect is ideas or forms, right? So form or idea, but form is really better here. We also talked about form back in chapter 4. We got to the Buddha, right? The Buddha came to this notion that the conscious I is conscious of something. What is it conscious of? Conscious of names and forms, right? So rational entities and intellectual entities form. And one example I've found helpful here is spoiler alert, Luke, I am your father, right? So in Empire Strikes Back, Darth Vader, Darth Vader, by the way, is Dutch, meaning dark father. Kind of on the nose, right? But so dark father says to Luke, right? What's his other name? What's Darth Vader's older name? Anakin Skywalker, right? So he was Anakin, and he says to Luke Skywalker, Luke, I am your father, right? And so the issue here is this am, and Luke whines like a little Like, no, it's an awful scene. It's so cringy, isn't it? It's just so cringy. He says, no, you're not my father. You killed my father, right? Which is not untrue, because Darth Vader kills this identity of Anakin. Anakin doesn't exist anymore. He's replaced, right? His I has become Darth Vader. He's no longer Anakin. He's now Darth Vader, right? So in that sense, Darth Vader does kill Anakin, at least that identity. And Luke saying, no, my father is dead, right? You are not my father. But Darth Vader means I am your father in terms of form, right? So all you need to be the form of a father is, a bottle of Chianti, I guess, and then and you know how to get there, right? I don't know. So that you just have to have an entertaining or fun afternoon or evening or morning or any time of day, really. Just, right, when a man and a woman love each other very much and are blessed by a Catholic priest in a formal ceremony, then and only then can babies happen, right? Delivered by a stork and all this kind of stuff, right? So, but that's what we mean by form. And I'm using this example in particular, right, because he is not doing the next one, which is function, right? So, so he has the form of father, but not the function of father. So the example I'd like to use here is another spoiler alert, but so in Kung Fu Panda 2, y'all seen Kung Fu Panda 2? So in Kung Fu Panda 2, Po, who's a panda, finds out that his father, who's a goose, is not his biological father. And he's like, I don't know who I am anymore, right? I've lost my identity. Who am I, right? Even raises that in the third movie. He's like, I don't know who I am anymore. I got to figure out who I am. And he's like, haven't I done this a few times before? They're all the same theme. Everyone is like, who am I? And in the first movie, it's like, figuring out I am the dragon warrior. Dragon warrior? Yeah. And in the second one, it's like, I am the son of Mr. Ping, right? So at the beginning, he rocks his world. And then by the end, he's, says like, Mr. Ping is my father. So what do we mean by is, right? So again, all of this, we're trying to get a sense of what is means. So is identity, to is to, quality, the lotus is blue, form, Luke, I am your father, function, Mr. Ping is my father. So he's not, obviously the goose is not his biological father, right? But in what way is he his father? Yeah.
He's the parental he functions, he acts as the parental figure that his father is supposed to.
Great, yep.
Yeah, he just acts like his father.
Yeah, he acts like his father. He performs all those functions. He takes care of him. He gives him food and shelter. He raises him. He loves him. He bathes him. He teaches him. He fathers him. Right. So so he performs that function, and therefore is being his father. Cool. Right. The reason I use these two, we probably figured it out, but the reason these two examples work really well is because Darth Vader has the form of father, but does not fulfill the function, right? Whereas Mr. Ping fulfills the function, but does not have the form, right? So they highlight those two very differences. Yeah.
Can you be both?
Of course. Yeah, I am. The third one, or the last one, is, nope. temporal. Or temporality? I'm not sure. Temporal. So, continuing with the father theme. My father, by the way, is in surgery like right now. So, should be fine. It's like a hernia. When you get old, like parts of your body start falling out of your body, which is, yeah, I know, right? It's one of the many reasons I don't want to be a nurse or doctor or any of that kind of stuff. Icky. But he's, having his parts put back inside of him. Anyway, temporal. So my dad and I have one thing, we have a lot of things in common. One of the things is I don't like to run. Running's not my thing. I don't run. I used to say that I would only run, or I'm only run when people chase me, but who am I going to outrun, right? So I don't know. I just don't like running. Running's definitely not my thing. And my dad, I only remember one time in my life when I saw my dad run. I was like a teenager and was standing in the kitchen with my mom and my sister, and they were talking, and I said, I just kind of shouted out, "Dad's running!" So like looking out the window, and said, "Dad's running!" And they were all like, "Bullshit! What? Dad doesn't run!" And so they all went to the window, like looking outside, and they're like, "I don't see him." And then, sure enough, he ran back the other direction. This time with a garden hose, because apparently his pickup truck had caught on fire, so he ran to get a water hose and to go and extinguish it. The point being, in the sentence, Dad is running, is, in this case, is extremely temporal or temporary, right? It's in the moment. It's at this particular time. So if I were to say right now, a sentence like, "It is raining," right? It's untrue right now because right now it is not raining, right? But the sentence, "It is raining," could be true or will be true. It will be true at some point, right? When it's actually raining, right? So this is incredibly temporal. It's always in the moment. Make sense? Cool? Yeah.
How can you be like being running? Like how that kind of
Okay, so one thing to notice is running, if we want, I don't know if this is answering the question, but running is a gerund, right? So, and so gerunds are that activity, right? They function as a noun, yep, but they're formed from verbs, right? So it's in the process of, right, in the state of running, right? So running. But here's the thing. This is too. Yeah. So that's a significant thing, right? So yeah. Cool. All right. Like 20 seconds left. Any questions?
So our podcast is due this Sunday.
Podcast is due this Sunday-ish, if it's a day or something.
What is it supposed to be on?
Okay, so it should cover everything since your last podcast, basically. Yeah. So chapters, 5, 6, 7, 4, 5, 6, 7. I think 4.
We ended kind of with 3.
Yeah. So 4, 5, 6, 7. So if you got 4 people in your podcast, you could each, choose something from a different chapter. You don't have to though. Just pick whatever. Just make sure that you're doing the phenomenological method, right? So run through all these steps. Each one of you run through the steps, right? So Connor pick something, and Abby pick something, and Zach pick something. Come to your podcast prepared to talk about something, right? So that's, everybody should come prepared with one thing.
Should we figure out like show/songs?
Yeah,
with our
you could talk about it in your podcast. That would be cool.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah. Damn.
To be honest, I like the Kung Fu Panda idea.
Dude, Kung Fu Panda is dope.
Fourth one, supposedly.
Oh,
I
really?
didn't even know that.
Yeah.
So,
Cool. Thanks, you too.